briefed the Security Council on the situation in Ukraine last time a little more than a month ago. Since then, the daily barrage of Russian missiles and drones against Ukrainian cities and towns has continued to intensify with devastating consequences for the civilian population. According to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, in June, civilian casualties in Ukraine reached a 3-year high. In the first half of the year alone, 6,754 civilians were killed or injured. According to Ukrainian authorities, so far in July, the Russian Federation has launched at least 5,183 long-range munitions against Ukraine, including a record number of 728 long-range drones on 9 July. In recent weeks, the capital city of Kyiv and the historic port city of Odessa have been especially heavily impacted by the daily attacks involving massive swarms of hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. And while frontline areas of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Sumy, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Donetsk regions of Ukraine remain particularly dangerous for civilians, nowhere is safe in Ukraine. Over the last few weeks, civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure have also been reported in western Ukrainian regions of Lviv, Volyn, Chernivtsi, as well as in Lutsk and Ivano-Frankivsk, with the last two cities reportedly experiencing their heaviest aerial attacks of the war. Across the country, attacks have struck hospitals, schools, energy and transport infrastructure, and residential buildings. On 21st July, a massive Russian aerial strike on Kiev reportedly caused damage to a metro station where hundreds were seeking shelter. The same attack reportedly set a kindergarten on fire and damaged a multi-story residential building, resulting in dozens of civilian casualties. On 11 July, Russian drones hit the city center of Kharkiv, reportedly damaging a maternity ward at the country's second largest hospital, forcing mothers with newborns to flee. On 24 June, a countrywide Russian drone and missile attack reportedly struck a passenger train and damaged more than 40 schools and kindergartens, a cathedral, 8 medical centers and hospitals, and several residential buildings. At least 21 people were reportedly killed and more than 300 injured. The same devastating scene was repeated during another record-level attack across Ukraine on 29 June. In total, since the beginning of the Russian Federation's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, OHCHR has verified that at least 13,580 civilians, including 716 children, have been killed. 34,115 civilians, including 2,173 children, have been injured. My colleague, Assistant Secretary General Joyce Msuya of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, will provide updates about the impacts of the escalating attacks on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. Mr. President, we are also concerned about the increasing number of reported civilian casualties reportedly resulting from Ukrainian drone attacks inside the Russian Federation. According to Russian officials, Ukrainian drone attacks in recent weeks have led to civilian casualties in the Belgorod, Kursk, Bryansk, Voronezh, Kaluga, Lipetsk, and Tula regions of the Russian Federation. Moscow and St. Petersburg have also been targeted with dozens of drones, reportedly causing severe disruptions to air traffic. Following one such recent series of attacks between 5 and 7 July, over 2,000 flights were reportedly disrupted in multiple Russian airports, including in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Nizhny Novgorod. The United Nations, however, is not in a position to verify these reported incidents in the Russian Federation, including any reports of civilian casualties. International law clearly prohibits attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. We strongly condemn all such attacks, wherever they occur. They must end immediately. Mr. President, the intensified aerial attacks and fighting on the ground continue to pose a significant threat to the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear sites. On 11 July, a drone attack reportedly hit the city hall in Enerhodar, where most of the staff of Ukraine's Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, ZNPP, live, located only about 5 kilometers from the plant. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, the reported drone attack followed reports of an overnight shooting incident near the ZNPP on 12 July. On 4 July, IAEA raised concerns over the reported loss by ZNPP of all its off-site power for several hours. Meanwhile, Ukraine's operating nuclear power plants, Khmelnytsky, Rivne, and South Ukraine also regularly report of drones being detected near the sites. These latest incidents underline the fragility of nuclear safety and security during the war and the need to ensure sustained attention to this issue. We continue to urge the sides to act responsibly. Any nuclear incident must be avoided at all costs. Mr. President, already at the end of last year, the total cost of reconstruction and recovery in Ukraine was assessed at 524 billion US dollars over the next decade. The most recent escalation of attacks is quickly adding to this toll. In this regard, this year's Ukraine Recovery Conference that took place in Rome earlier this month represented a significant milestone in the international community's commitment to supporting Ukraine's long-term reconstruction. The event culminated in over 11 billion US dollars in pledged funding. Speaking on behalf of the Secretary General, acting UNDP Administrator Hao Liang-shu reaffirmed the UN's commitment to supporting Ukraine to rebuild stronger, from advancing green energy and mine action to supporting community resilience. It is crucial that the international solidarity with Ukraine is sustained as the country embarks on its long journey for recovery. Mr. President, on Wednesday, Ukrainian and Russian delegations met in Istanbul for the third time this year. We welcome the continuation of these direct contacts between the sides and urge Ukraine and the Russian Federation to make further progress towards a ceasefire and the lasting settlement. We are grateful for the meaningful efforts of Turkey, the United States, and other relevant actors to help sustain the necessary diplomatic momentum. We commend in particular the reported progress made in the humanitarian track of these talks, including with regards to exchanges of prisoners and of war and civilian detainees. Since last May, following the first two rounds of negotiations in Istanbul, the Russian Federation and Ukraine have already reportedly exchanged hundreds of prisoners of war, including those badly injured, as well as more than 7,000 mortal remains. Each such exchange and repatriation alleviates the pain of the affected families and serves as a reminder that diplomacy can work. We therefore call on the sides to continue such exchanges. Mr. President, on Tuesday, this Council unanimously adopted a resolution reiterating that all states shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means through dialogue, diplomatic engagement, and cooperation in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. The resolution also underscored the importance of the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and meaningful participation of youth in dispute resolution efforts. As the Secretary General stated during that meeting, diplomacy may not have always succeeded in preventing conflicts, violence, and instability, but it still holds the power to stop them. With this in mind, and recalling the Security Council Resolution 2774 of 2025, adopted in February, it is crucial that the momentum of the ongoing diplomatic contacts is not only sustained, but reinforced by genuine political will to make tangible progress towards ending the current dangerous cycle of escalation as soon as possible. The heartbreaking and rising human toll of the past nearly 3.5 years of war underscores the urgency of a complete, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire as the first step towards a just and lasting peace. A peace that is in line with the UN Charter, international law, and relevant UN resolutions, and that respects the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We remain ready to support all meaningful efforts to this end. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Jancha for his briefing. I now give the floor to Madame Joyce Msuya.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to brief the Council once again on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, along with Assistant Secretary General Jenka. Since our last update to this Council on 20 June, the humanitarian situation in Ukraine has continued to deteriorate sharply. Over the past week, renewed waves of missile and drone strikes have devastated lives and infrastructure across multiple regions, as already outlined by Assistant Secretary General Jenka. According to the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, the scale and speed of civilian harm remain alarmingly high. In the first half of 2025, nearly 50% more civilian casualties were recorded compared to the same period last year. Over the past day, authorities report strikes on urban centers, including Cherkasy, Kharkiv, and Odessa, killed 5 civilians and injured 93, among them 11 children, as hostilities intensify nationwide. Last weekend, attacks struck populated areas in Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Sumy, reportedly killing dozens of people and injuring more than 70, including children. In Kharkiv, a rehabilitation center for people with disabilities was hit. In Kiev, a kindergarten, a metro station, shops, and residential buildings were damaged. In the Ivano-Frankivsk region, once seen as a refuge far from the front lines and home to many displaced families, we saw the largest attack there since the war escalated in 2022. There is no safe place left in Ukraine. These are the latest in a series of attacks that have brought even more fear and suffering to communities, both near the front lines and far from them. The use of explosive weapons in populated areas, including long-range missiles and drones, remains a key driver of civilian harm. Mr. President, civilians in Ukraine continue to bear the heaviest burden, struggling to access food, water, power, and healthcare. Nearly 13 million people need assistance, but limited funding means we can reach only a fraction of them. For many displaced women and girls, safety remains out of reach. Risks of violence at home, in shelters, and during evacuations continue. Yet, the local women-led groups best placed to help are scaling back due to funding shortfalls, leaving countless women without the protection they so urgently need. Displacement from frontline areas continue to rise. Since April, more than 26,000 people fleeing hostilities have registered at transit centers. In response, our partners are working with authorities to open new sites in the Sumy and Dnipro regions to meet rising needs. Across Ukraine, 3.7 million people remain displaced, with nearly 6 million refugees abroad. Additionally, unverified reports in recent days and weeks indicate civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure in the regions of Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Voronezh, Kaluga, Lipetsk, and Tula regions in the Russian Federation. Under international humanitarian law, all parties must take all feasible precautions to avoid and minimize civilian harm. Mr. President, the continued use of anti-personnel mines puts civilian lives and livelihoods at risk every day. The Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention strictly prohibits their use. Under this convention, states have agreed that the harm caused by these weapons is unacceptable and that considerations of humanity must impose limits on their use. We cannot go back. This is why we note with alarm the recent decree by the Ukrainian president announcing Ukraine's withdrawal from the convention. This follows the regrettable decisions of neighboring countries to withdraw from this convention. Assertions of exceptional threats and military necessity cannot outweigh international humanitarian law, which seeks to limit human suffering precisely when a state is fighting against its enemy. The Secretary General has urged all states to adhere to humanitarian disarmament treaties and immediately halt any steps towards their withdrawal. Mr. President, despite relentless risks, our humanitarian partners in Ukraine continue their vital work, reaching more than 3.6 million people with emergency health care, shelter, clean water, and cash to families since January. But access remains precarious. In regions such as Kherson and Donetsk, intensified fighting has forced aid convoys to be delayed or suspended, putting humanitarian workers at risk and interrupting life-saving support. We remain committed